You could think about things that have happened that have had like, you know, a small instance that had huge impact on the world. But you can also talk about those stories as an individual. I can ask you, I can ask anyone, what's the small thing that's happened in your life that's had the huge, hugest impact on it? And those are really interesting, I think, stories to tell. And so for us as a world, let's not lead with climate. Let's not lead with sustainability in any jargon, because I think people have got huge amounts of fatigue and they're tired of being told what to do. I hate being told what to do. So I've got no interest in doing that to other people. Our whole thing is, let's show people how almost nothing can change everything. Let's tell those stories, and then they learn about point one through that.
The world's greatest brands move people to act by making even the most complex ideas feel completely effortless. But most brands default to jargon, complexity, and asking way too much of their audiences, so they're left wondering why nobody is doing anything. Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell. Today, Ryan Kohn joins us, and he's going to show us exactly how to fix that problem. He's a serial entrepreneur who built Proper Corn into Europe's largest healthy snacking brand. He became one of Europe's first B Corps, and now he's founded Point One, a movement asking businesses for just 1% of revenue to fund the global clean energy transition. Today, you will learn how to compress your biggest idea into one irresistible theme, why leading with story always beats leading with your cause, and why simplicity isn't a shortcut, it's the destination. I'm so glad you're here to learn how almost nothing changes everything with your brand storytelling. Hello, Ryan. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And where are you coming to us from?
I am coming to you live from London.
Live. I hear it's hotter than hell over there. There's no man-made climate warming going on whatsoever there.
Exactly. Yeah. It's been, I think a few weeks ago, it was down at 11 degrees centigrade. And now it was up at over 30, 35 degrees. So there's been huge swings here. So yeah, very, very present global warming going on in London.
Yeah. Well, I was very excited to get you on the show when a couple of months ago, our mutual good friend, Bruno Sarda, he and his wife, Jody, were up at our place in Northern Arizona here, and we were chatting, catching up, because I'd done a lot of work with Bruno over the years, including teaching at Arizona State University in my role with sustainable storytelling. And he was talking about a number of the really interesting folks he's been working with, and your name popped up, and he said, "Oh, Park, you've got to talk to Ryan." And I go, "Well, why is that?" And then he gave me a little bit of the insight into what you're doing there with this platform called Point One. And your tagline, which I think, or theme, I'm not going to call it tagline, it's bigger than that. It's your overall narrative focus, I thought was one of the most brilliant I have ever heard in all of branding, let alone in the very complex, controversial world of sustainability. And that is almost nothing changes everything. And so we're going to unpack that here in a minute, but let me stop yapping right now and let's get your backstory. How did you find yourself, get to where you are and what you're doing today with Point One?
So I always think it's, your parents, your childhood. I feel like for me anyway, that's a good place to start, because I came from a family where both my parents were entrepreneurs, and from a very young age, I was kind of given that, I don't know, entrepreneurial kick up the bum. And what I mean by that is that I remember maybe I was about 11, 12 years old, and I remember asking my dad for £5 so I could go and buy, a football magazine with some stickers from my local store. And he said, "Yeah, fine, that's fine." And then the week afterwards, I went back to him and asked for another £5 to buy more stickers and whatnot. And he was like, "Well, no, if you want to carry on, earning, you need to actually earn, you need to do something for this." So I was like, "Okay, well, what do I need to do?" And he said, "Go and wash my car and I'll give you £5. So I went and washed his car, got the £5, and I was like, "Oh, this is great. Well, maybe I can wash more people's cars and I can get more £5. And I then ended up washing, a number of people's cars around my local neighborhood and earning, whatever it was, 20, 30 quid a week. But that for me felt like I was, had more than enough money to go and spend on whatever I would wanted to buy at 11 years old. But it taught me a really good lesson of just kind of being front footed and taking initiative, I guess, with regards to life and with regards to money. And that really stayed with me, I guess. And then I remember setting up my first business when I was at university, which was a student events business. And very quickly that business grew to become one of the biggest student events businesses in the UK. I think we had about 400 student employees and we were running 16 events a week in 11 different cities. And yeah, it was, again, a really amazing crash course in building a culture, building a brand, learning how to build relationships with different people from various different walks of life, dealing with lots of, I guess, like clubs and leisure space owners. And sold that business, got into property development, started my own environmentally friendly property development business, building houses that were premium, but also predominantly run off renewable energy. And then a friend of mine called Cassandra had an idea to start a snacks business, a healthy snacking business, starting with popcorn. And for some reason, it just always sounded like a great idea to me. And she was looking for someone to do it with her. And I jumped at it, really. I think I was a bit kind of not too sure about the property world anymore. I think it's quite a capitalist world where, often property goes to the highest bidder. And I think building a brand there is quite difficult, even though I'd actually had some really good success with it. And then, yeah, we started this snacks business. Our first customer, it was called Propercorn, was the first product. Our first customer was Google, their head offices. And very quickly we built, I think, one of the fastest growing brands in the whole of Europe. And we're now sold throughout Europe. And I think something like, 8 million snacks a month goes through the
Uh,
business.
and are you still a part of that proper
No, so we
corn?
sold that business 5 years ago. So
Okay.
that was we started it back in 2011 and yeah, sold it 5 years ago now. And yeah, it was just really something I'm very proud of. Built a wonderful culture. I can tell you lots about that and some of the initiatives we had. We had a chef who made breakfast and lunch every day for everyone. We gave everyone in the business unlimited holiday. Everyone in the business has shares, so everyone was a shareholder on the same journey together.
Now, you
Um,
sound crazy right now, right?
yeah,
I mean, most American business people are like, "This guy's not for me," because there's no way we could pull that off here. How did you do it?
well, I think that first of all, I really believe in the power of building a strong culture. So I think that if you build a team that are willing to run through brick walls for you, and we were selling snacks, we weren't saving lives. We were just, it's a very trivial thing, let's be honest. But we built a culture where people really cared. And so while we invested in that and we probably spent more money than most businesses do per person on that culture, I think that paid back in spades when it came to productivity and ambition and, having someone going into big retailers across the UK and being passionate about what they're selling and talking about what they're doing. They're up against people from big conglomerates who are probably suited and booted, but, sit there with a PowerPoint presentation, whereas we were all about bringing theatre and energy and look, it worked because we were up against the big guys, and we beat them, I guess, in the sense in that we're now the biggest, yeah, popcorn
Yeah.
brand across Europe, but also largest healthy snacking brand. So we do lentil chips, we do a whole host of things.
So, and when you attract professionals that are really driven, to make a difference in their career and in the company and your communities you serve, that you can give them unlimited holiday. And my guess is they probably take fewer holidays than if they were at a big corporation saying, "Okay, you've got the next 2 weeks off."
It's funny, so many people say that, and I mean, if I'm honest, it was a real mix across the board.
Mhm.
So we had, our financial director actually, he ended up taking over 40 days, but his work ethic was brilliant, and he only took those days because the partner that he had married was from a quite an affluent family, and so it meant they were often away. But he was, he was always on call. He was able to work from where he was. When he was obviously in the UK, he'd be staying late. He never once let the business down. And I think it was a really good example of someone who, I think all you're saying when you give us someone an unlimited holiday is we trust you. You know,
Mhm.
here are at the beginning of the year, we agree the objectives of what you set out to do as a business and what you set out to do as an individual. Here are your KPIs. How you get there is up to you. And if you've got that clarity and you've got that agreement, then I don't mind if someone ends up, taking some extra time and that's how they manage to kind of manage their life.
Yeah.
And I guess as a founder, we didn't have holiday quotas, but you felt that responsibility yourself. And so all you're doing is giving that same, same structure to the
Mm.
rest of your organization. And
So
it worked really well.
So when you were young man, your dad, said, "Okay, wash the car, get your 5 pounds." You made, spun that into some significant quid. We call it didge over here, some quid. And then in college, interesting, I kind of did something similar to you, but not nearly to the magnitude. I started a small little band booking business, and I would bring in bands from Seattle to fraternities and that kind of thing. There was just two of us doing it, but you built this very large enterprise, what you said, 400 college students working for you.
Yeah.
So you must have been just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, common sense, just get in there, figuring out what's going to work and what doesn't work because you weren't around long enough on this planet to really know how to run an event business.
So literally that. I mean, I think the one thing I would say that has always stuck with me though is so the initial name of our business was called Revamp, and that stood for Revitalize a Marketplace. And a lot of the time when you go to in a club night in a bar at your university, it's kind of like a DJ in a box. So the DJ's there, they're playing some music and everyone's dancing. Our whole thing was, well, hold on, how can we do things differently? How can we what extra can we bring to turn this into something that really stands out? And so we started off with like a hip hop night with break dancers and beatboxers, and people loved it. It was like, when do you get to see amazing talent and performing at those on a weekly basis? And then we had another night where we brought in a live funk band, and in another room had some house music and hip hop playing. And another night we actually recreated the full moon party that happens in Thailand on is it Koh Phangan, where
Hmm.
we literally made these kind of vodka Red Bull buckets that people would buy from the bar and drink, and everyone would be wearing these kind of UV lights and the paints and whatnot. And that was the thing, was about bringing theatre. And that premise though of like, how do you as a business try and get cut through? How do you stand out from the rest of the industry, has stayed with me forever. And it's something that I wholeheartedly believe in everything we do. And I think I always say to any business, if I'm giving them advice, what's the thing that you're doing to make the magic happen? How are you, and that doesn't mean you have to spend more money, but it does mean you have to have creative thought.
Yeah.
And that's always a thing for some reason. And I don't know where that came from, by the way. I don't know, but it was always something that has just been in my head about taking opportunities and thinking about how you can do it better.
Mm. Well, and you said something earlier too that I fancy when you said you've got to bring theater and energy. And I couldn't agree with that more when I'm speaking and when I'm doing training and so forth. People will ask me sometimes, what is it that you focus on so that you really connect with that audience? And I said, just remember, first and foremost, even in a business situation, in a sustainability situation, it is performance art. You have to perform to be entertaining, to get their attention, and then you teach them and you train them through that that entertainment channel versus just blah, 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 blahing on. So I love that idea about bringing theater and energy to all business. And so from your event world, then you went into what I guess characterized as sustainable or eco-efficient housing, and then these natural popcorn or healthy popcorn. When can you take us to the moment in your life did you feel like, oh, business can stand for more, not do the damage to the planet, and actually have a good impact for people? When that hit you?
So again, I think from a young age, I always had this thing. I don't know where it came from again, but I was always actually I do. I feel like I have a reference point in that I remember going on holiday to Southern Europe. So I went to Spain and was, on a pedalo in the water in the sea. And there was all of this kind of like sewage water in the sea that was just really disgusting. And I remember just being so revolted by it and so just and it just made me it just I think made me just think about how did that happen and how can we protect this world? Because, nature for me was everything. And, I play a lot of sport and that's always outside and so I think I then had an amazing experience when I was 16, and I was super lucky. It was through the school I went to, whereby we got an opportunity to work with physically handicapped teenagers. And that had an amazingly profound effect on me in that I feel like I'm a very fortunate person. I come from a loving family. I've been given every opportunity in life to succeed. I, grew up just outside London and was probably in my own little bubble, being totally honest. And then working with physically handicapped teenagers was a real slap in the face of like, you know what, Ryan, there's a lot of people in this world who don't just have this bubble world that you're operating in. And actually, and I know it sounds really obvious, but like it it just I remember coming home and speaking to my dad again and just saying, Dad, I think I know what I want to do. I think I want to work in a school with these you know, teenagers and do what I can to help. I loved it. I got so much like enjoyment and satisfaction from it. And my dad said to me, he was probably thinking, I don't want to, I haven't spent all that money on your private education for you just, work in a school. He was like, if you want to make a real impact, build your own school. And
Oh,
that did
that's
actually land
cool.
with me. I was like, okay, maybe there's something I can go bigger. Maybe I can have more impact. And that's not, I think people who work in those schools obviously are incredible people. I've got friends who work in schools and for all types of people from with disabilities or disadvantages. Anyway, so that's nothing against that. But it landed, and I remember just thinking, right, well, everything you do now, you need to be thinking about how you're going to have some kind of form of impact, and that was why when I got into property development, it was like, well, what's the best version of that? If you're going to build something that's going to last for decades, why can't we build it in a way that is that isn't harming the people and planet around it? And so, yeah, I think, and even with proper snacks, our snacks business. We were one of the first B Corps in Europe. I co-wrote the how-to guide for businesses to get to net zero by 2030 for the B Corp community. And we did our absolute best to be conscious of the way that we were going about our business. And I think, if I'm honest, that's probably just the least the least we ought to do.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think it was probably a combination of those things that
Yeah.
that it was in me.
Well, what's interesting about your answer there is it also plays to this idea of almost nothing changes everything. And you guys have even captured this in your marketing, which I want you to kind of explain to our listeners, viewers here. But when I asked you, Ryan, can you take me to that moment? You at first said, well, I don't really know if there is one. And yeah, this happens to everybody. And then boom. Well, yes, there was that time surfing outside of Spain and all that sewage, and it was disgusting. Oh, and it triggered a second moment, working with the high school kids and so forth. And I share that or call that out because I want our listeners to think about that when you are building something. What is really driving you? It always leads back to a few moments in time that just changed your whole world. It created a curiosity and a passion. I call it don't look for your stories, find your scenes, and your story is going to find you. And you just, describe two scenes in your life that lead you to where you are today. So let's talk about today. Almost nothing changes everything. How did you come up with that?
Well, first of all, can I just say I love that framing of finding your scene. That literally says it perfectly. I've never really thought about it like that, and I might have to steal that part. So
You can
apologies.
have it. I did a TEDx talk about that, on that about 7 years ago, and that's the
Amazing.
thing.
Need
Stop
to watch
looking
it.
for your story, find your scenes, and your
Fantastic.
story will find you. So,
Love
please
that.
use that as much as you like.
Okay. So how do we come up with point one? Change it. Almost nothing changes everything. So maybe, well, I think to answer that, I probably have to give the background about what we're doing.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So point, like, in parallel with running these various different businesses, as I said, I've always had a real passion for the not-for-profit sector, and I've done various campaigns along the way. I volunteered in refugee camps in Greece. I've Yeah, it's always been a big part of I guess my life now. And when we sold that business, I always knew that I wanted to do something to better people and planet in some way, especially the environment. The environment was always something that was I was very passionate about. And so when we sold the business, got married, had two beautiful kids, and a couple of years ago, I guess was like most people do, just kind of observing the world and kind of noticed a real disconnect whereby if you ask anyone, do you care about the well-being of the planet? The answer is always yes. But then that doesn't always translate into action. And when I was like, well, why is that? And I looking at the climate space over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, and it feels like there's been a huge emphasis on behavior change. So, buy an electric car, stop flying, stop eating meat, shouting at businesses and governments to change their ways. And while there's definitely been some progress, I don't think we've seen the rate of progress that we recognize that we all need. And so, couple that with when you look at the data, 75% of greenhouse gases comes from fossil fuel. And now we're at a moment in time where clean energy is up to 70% cheaper than all forms of fossil fuel. And so I was like, well, there must be a way of leaning into that. Like the economics have never been in our favor as much as they are now. And yeah, it really worked out that if you took just 0.1% of corporate revenue, put it in a pot, focused on the clean energy transition, within 15 years, the whole world could have access to clean energy and there'd be very little need for fossil fuel. And all it requires is almost nothing, just 0.1%. So now I really believe in the power of brands. My previous business was we launched with popcorn, which is probably the lowest barrier to entry product you can ever launch with because you can make it in your kitchen. But we built a brand that resonated with people. And I think the same for the environment in that considering I think the number is 85% of the world's population wants to see stronger measures on climate. But that 85%, I don't think they have a brand in this space that really resonates with people. And when I say a brand, I don't mean like a brand that's selling them product or service, but like a charity, like a not-for-profit.
Hmm.
And so with us, I was like, well, we need to build a brand around this. We need to capture the hearts and minds of people. And so I can't take credit for coming up with the line, almost nothing changes everything. I worked with these two guys who are brilliant, kind of brilliant brand people in terms of, they sit down with you and they take everything that's in your head and they try and distill it into a really clear brand house. What's your purpose? What's your vision? What's your values? And I think that's one of the most important parts of any business is understanding what that is and really then living and dying by those purpose, that vision, that values. And yeah, through that process, they came up with this phrase, which was almost nothing changes everything. And it just captured everything. It captured everything we wanted to do. It captured the idea, but it also captures the stories that we want to tell. I love what you just said about finding your scene because almost nothing changes everything. You can think of moments on a cultural, big cultural moments like you can think about the Me Too movement, or you could think about things that have happened that have had you know, a small instance that had huge impact on the world. But you can also talk about those stories as an individual. I can ask you, I can ask anyone, what's the small thing that's happened in your life that's had the hugest impact on it? And those are really interesting, I think, stories to tell. And so for us as a world, let's not lead with climate. Let's not lead with sustainability in any jargon, because I think people have got huge amounts of fatigue and they're tired of being told what to do. I hate being told what to do. So I've
Hmm.
got no interest in doing that to other people. Our whole thing is let's show people how almost nothing can change everything. Let's tell those
Yeah.
stories and then they learn about point one through that.
Well, and when I was talking to Bruno, I had him back on my show about a month ago, just because I hadn't had him on for several years, and he's doing such amazing things over at Ernst and Young. That I asked him on the show, and I didn't cue this up for him. I just asked him point blank because I was curious what he was going to say. I said, "All right, so in America, we have an administration now that pretty much is trying to poo-poo all sustainability, all climate initiatives, solar, wind, you name it." And I asked him, I said, "Has that made his job more daunting?" or is he finding, something of interest in there? And he thought for a second, and he said something I found really fascinating. Ryan, he said, what it's done is made major North American, companies stop looking at sustainability and climate change as being compliant to regulations that they have to follow. And he said, I am now seeing a greater culture around it. Now that they're not told you have to do it, they realize the importance of doing it, and having it, really transition from being compliance to culture has an even greater impact. And I kind of think that's what you're doing there as well.
Well, the thing is with culture, I think it's an incredibly powerful tool because it scales so much faster than regulation. Culture shifts can happen overnight. We saw that. I don't want to compare point one to Black Lives Matter, but like that was, something happened that then on Monday mornings, businesses, doesn't matter if you were a small, medium-sized business or if you were in the S&P 500, boards were meeting up going, what are we doing to increase the representation within our business from, of different cultures? And so if you get it right, I think it's an incredibly powerful way to connect with people. And, our whole strategy, again, with point one, is about connecting with people through their cultural hangout. So through music, through sport, through art, through film. And again, telling those stories or showing those examples within those categories where almost nothing changes everything. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that for us is everything. And yeah, I'm trying to think
Mhm.
how, I can
Well,
try and
let's
think.
think about your campaign. If you could explain the campaign, because what I liked about it, leading up to this, you talked about the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matters and very left leaning important movements, but also movements that can push off a lot of people that are sitting in the bell curve, and they're like, Ryan, I want to do my part, but I'm not going to be a complete and utter activist in it. But you also in your campaign showed where little single moments changed everything in culture, in entertainment, sports, and whatever. Can you kind of take
Sure.
us through
And
your
by the way,
campaign?
I should say that as an organization, we are not politically affiliated, by the way. And, the thing that I push more than anything is cheap energy. All we're trying to say to people is, look, do you want cheap energy that's clean or do you want expensive energy that's dirty? And that's a really simple argument. But yeah, the example I think you're referring to. So we've been speaking to, you know, some of the world's biggest organizations about them joining, which has been really exciting. And with the World Cup coming up in America, Canada, and Mexico, we were looking at what 0.1% of 90 minutes is 5.4 seconds. So just enough time for someone to score a goal or someone to get sent off in a football match that changes everything in that game. So could we look back at all the previous World Cup moments? What are those moments in those games where almost nothing changes everything? Can we highlight those moments? And then as the World Cup unfolds in front of us, again, pinpoint those moments where almost nothing changes everything in those games and use that as the vehicle to connect with people. And then they learn about point one through that mechanism. And that really aligns for us because we're meeting people in their cultural hangouts. We're not ramming any messaging down their throat. We're just showing them, wonderful examples that they can relate to about how almost nothing changes everything. And it's got to do with their favorite, with their nation or one of their favorite football games and that it translates really well across sport. There's so many moments, you could think about in golf, certain golf shots, the iconic Masters Tiger Woods putt, and or um, certain matches within tennis. Like there's
Mhm.
loads of opportunities to show those things. So yeah, that's what I mean by using culture as our way to connect with people.
Yeah. It reminded me of a campaign that we started for water conservation back in 1998, just in Mesa, Arizona, and it grew to be the largest water conservation campaign in the country because we resold the license to it to over 400 municipalities and private entities that wanted to promote it, and we did the same sort of thing. And I will go to say I was not smart. I think I followed my gut. Maybe like when you were building your college, event enterprise, I had been in the marketing world long enough. But what we did is kind of what you just reminded me of, and that is we call them environmental prompts. And what we did is the headline was simply, there are a number of ways to save water, and they all start with you. So if you don't do it, all the other hundreds of ways to save water don't matter because you got to be the impetus. And so we ended up creating literally a list of 100 surprising water saving devices, such as a toothbrush. It's an environmental prompt. Like begs the question, how does a toothbrush save me water? It's a reminder to turn the water off while you're brushing your teeth, and the average person will save 4 gallons every single day. Add that up. And so we did it with shovels and we did it with cars. I mean, there's all these weird things you would never think of as a water saving device, but it was just meant to prompt you, and it became an environmental prompt. And that's kind of what you're doing with, talking about the World Cup and whatever, meeting people where they already are. So your brand becomes a part of their life, even if it's just for a short moment they think about you, but you're not selling to them. You are now embedding yourself into them.
That's exactly it. And again, I love that example. And it's climate change is complex, and our whole purpose is about making it ridiculously easy to be part of the solution. And we've all been sat before where we all talk and we're like, well, what can we do? What is the use of me recycling? What's the use of me doing it? And actually, this is this our whole thing is actually trying to show that those small things add up, and if we all do it, and it starts with you, as you say, it becomes a really big thing. And I think what the climate space has also been lacking is just a one singular idea that we can all hang our hat on and go, oh, right, if we all just do this can be the outcome.
Mhm.
And, I've never, 0.1% for context is, for every $1,000 of revenue, it's $1. Or for every $100, it's 10 cents. So it's really like a rounding error in most scenarios. And if you're a business that turns over $1 million a year, it's $1,000. So it's not supposed to be an amount that becomes a real burden, a heavy weight around businesses' necks. It's supposed to be an amount that, they almost wouldn't notice, but if everyone does it, becomes, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely planet changing. So yeah, this is, and I think making it simple enough that people can feel like they can make a difference, I think is really important, because it
Yeah.
is such a, what was interesting about when you look at things like COVID is there was a, absolute global response to something because we all felt that real and present danger at the same time. And so governments, were able to coordinate a response that, eventually we got there and now we don't even talk about COVID anymore. But, you know, climate change is going to be the fallout of climate change is already one, it's already happening. And we're seeing, horrific natural disasters and water shortages and, rising heat and et cetera, et cetera. But it's going to get so much worse. And it's crazy to think that now we don't even feel comfortable talking about it in lots
Mhm.
of ways. Like companies are scared to talk about it, especially obviously in the US. And it's so encouraging hearing that feedback from Bruno. He's always brilliant for having a bit of a temperature read from the big organizations that they're actually grabbing the mantle themselves and saying, well, we don't need the legislation. We're just going to do it anyway. And I think actually last year was the US's biggest um, output from renewables that they've ever had. And you've got
Mhm.
amazing states like Texas who, rely hugely on things like wind and it's an amazingly cheap, resilient energy source for them. And it's not affected by things like the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
And I mean, I always think about with Donald Trump right now, he's doing the movement an amazing favor because,
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
everyone's thinking about, right, well, if we want energy resilience, you can, the cost of solar panels have come down so much. The cost of
Mhm.
wind has come, and the cost of battery storage has come down so much. So you can build these grids. You don't even have to be plugged into the main grid. You can actually build these grids now at a fraction of the price very quickly. You don't need to drill anything. You don't need to find where the oil is. You don't need to, extract anything. You just, the supply is there. You can get this stuff going pretty quick now. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, we're seeing, I mean, last year, what, $3 trillion was invested into energy across
Mhm.
the world, and 2 trillion of that went into clean
Yeah.
energy. So it's happening. It's just a question of how quickly
Mhm.
we get there.
Well, when we moved up here to northern Arizona, we're up in the mountains. We're at 6,600 feet. We will sometimes get really big winters, and this last winter, not so much. But first thing we bought was a Subaru Ascent. They're largest, but still a small SUV. But it's powered by gas. And then we bought a Subaru Solterra, which is their EV that they built with Toyota. And it's a fantastic little car. We use that bombing all around up here in northern Arizona. And when we go into Flagstaff, which is about 20 miles from us, we get in that EV and we said, isn't it so great? We're not burning any gas at all. Because when I take the Ascent in, it's a $20, round trip by the time I get in and back and burn up all that fuel. So it just really underscored to us the power of it. Now, you have had Point One going for about 2 years, you said?
So I had the idea a couple of years ago. We actually only launched it now 2.5 months ago.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
yeah, it took we beginning of last year, we partnered with this amazing organization called the Global Energy Alliance, who were founded by the Rockefeller, IKEA Foundations, and the Bezos Earth Fund. They've now mobilized over $7 billion of clean energy finance in developing countries, and they're achieving remarkable results. So over 300 million tons of carbon emissions reduced, I think over 8 million jobs now created, and access for over 90 million people. So they're our implementation partner there, where when we raise the money goes to them. They deploy that through the developing world, so Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And they've got 50 alliance partners, which are essentially local NGOs on the ground in those territories that can do this in an impactful but also culturally sensitive way.
Hmm.
So it's a very, very, it's a very smart structure, and we're very happy to be partnering with them.
So you're
And
a couple of months in then. How are you getting people to donate, for
yeah,
lack of a better term,
we've
to
now got
invest?
totally, yes, we've now got, I think, just over 50 businesses who have signed up. We've ranging from, fashion brands and, finance businesses, media companies, like a whole real mix of.
Can you share some of their names?
Yeah, I mean, there's Jam. So there's an organization called Jamjar, which is a VC in the UK. It's the VC company of the innocent smoothie founders who sold their business to Coca-Cola for hundreds of millions, probably about 10, 15 years ago.
Mhm.
And they started that VC. There's Piper, which is a private equity firm. There's a super cool fashion brand called Alex Eagle, which has got a few stores in London. And she's also a contributing editor for things like Vogue. Big interior design firm in the US called Claudia Afshar. We've got, so it's a real, a real mix, to be honest with you, of organizations.
I'm
And it's been
surprised
really nice.
Patagonia isn't on that list. It seems like
Well,
this is something they'd jump all over.
yeah, I mean, look, we haven't even had a conversation with them, but they're an amazing organization. They already
Yeah.
obviously do a huge amount. And look, one thing I would also say with Point One is we're not about replacing other brilliant initiatives that people are doing. We just have this singular message that if we all do this, we can achieve something incredible. And so we encourage even that the businesses who have signed up to Point One to be doing more. Point One is almost like the least an organization should do. But because we try and make it super simple for businesses to sign up, it's a very, and they plug into us. We give them case studies about where their money goes. We give them, um, you know, the Point One emblem they can use on their product or service. We give them loads of ways of being able to tell the story of where the impact is going. And so, yeah, Patagonia would be an amazing person to, organization. If you're listening to this podcast, we'd love to speak to you. Sorry we haven't got around to it yet, but you're on our list for sure.
Someone else you should talk to, and I'd be happy to make an introduction, is Gensler, a very, gigantic worldwide architectural firm, and they do some just brilliant, brilliant building. Got a friend down in Austin, Texas, that is their chief storyteller, but I would think they would be all over something like this because of their global impact.
Yeah, I would love. Well, I mean, listen, any introductions to organize it. And to be honest with you, any organization, a part of what this is about creating a movement. So we want this to feel like grassroots, like a groundswell, coming up. So it doesn't need to be the biggest companies in the world. This is about getting SMEs on board. It's about, speaking to businesses, both big, small, all shapes and sizes really. But yeah, anyone you can introduce us to, we'd love to speak to them. And if anyone is listening and you run a business or you work at a business, please get in touch. We'd
Where
love
do we
to.
send them?
Well, our website, if you want a bit of information, is just point1.world. So all written out. There's no numbers in that. It's just point1.world. And you can go there and you can literally sign up as a business, or you can register for more interest.
Oh, that's great. And as I always do to get prepared for these types of shows, I ran your point one, ran through our story cycle genie. Just to give me
Mm.
a basic brand assessment on it, and then the overall brand narrative strategy. I sent it to you a while ago. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at that or
I
not.
flicked through it and I was like, I mean, yeah, I didn't go through it in detail, but I was like, this is quite incredible. But I'd love to hear some of the results or some of your
Oh,
feedback.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it first just looks at how you're showing up by going to your website. And then that gives me some more, intel. And then from that brand assessment, which it creates in just a couple of minutes, it will create an entire brand narrative strategy based on our story cycle system. The same system that I taught to our students at ASU when I was working with Bruno over there. And it's just a brand storytelling system. It's totally focused, inspired by the hero's journey. It has the and, but, therefore framework at its heart, which is a way to use a very small framework for really big impact in a very short way. And it's the only platform I know of that's completely narrative based. So it looks at your story, says, how well are you telling your story? What are you doing well? What reveals some gaps that you could easily fix, and then maybe even inspires you with ways to think about your brand story. So, for instance, let me just jump into the positioning statement that it just came up with,
Mm.
revealing in the way you are showing up in the world. And it reads, Point One is the only global business network that makes the energy transition inevitable by making participation in it almost effortless.
I mean, I love that. And the fact that it's taken that's literally the heart of what we do. Our purpose, I mentioned it earlier, but it is literally about making it ridiculously easy to be part of the solution. You know,
Yeah.
uh, I'm a big fan of simplicity. For me, if something's not simple, it doesn't land. And so keeping things as simple as possible. And I love that. I love the way the word effortless there. That's
hmm And then
and
in the,
like you go
yeah,
go
go
on.
ahead.
No, no, go.
Oh, no, and then in the Genie, it gives you the reasoning why it came up with that. So it's not saying, "Here," it's cramming it down your throat. It says, "Here's what the way I think you're showing up," and then you would iterate inside the Genie, so it collaborates with you. It's just not making stuff up. It gave a unique value proposition based off of your position statement. It says, uh, pers 0.1% of revenue, 100% of the planet.
Yeah.
And
We've
then
got that on our site already.
you've
Yeah.
got that. So, and
Yeah.
then, so this UVP achieves maximum compression of the brand's core paradox. The smallest possible corporate commitment produces the largest possible collective outcome. But it's so simple. That's what I love about, UVPs can get really complicated if you don't really think about it, but you guys have already driven to the core of it. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, by the way, what I love about that is I always say to people, I don't actually care that much about clean energy in particular. As in, people might be like, oh my God, this guy's just obsessed with clean energy. Like, I'm not. The thing I care about is I have two young children and I care about protecting the world we love. It's as simple as that. So I want them to go on holiday in 20 years' time and I want them to be able to see a coral reef. And them not to be gone. I want them to be able to go skiing in France. These are obviously first world wants, but I want them. Climate change affects everything. It affects the water we drink, the food we eat, the places we travel to, the refugee crisis. It affects absolutely everything. We think we've got a lot of refugees or a lot of immigration now. It's going to be so many more when people are literally living in worlds that are uninhabitable. So, you know, this isn't about clean energy. This is just simply about protecting the world we love. And that's why I love that. I love that statement of 0.1% and then 100% of the planet, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's, and if someone said to me tomorrow, hey, look, there's a better way to reduce carbon or, reduce fossil fuels or, yeah, take out carbon from the atmosphere and it's super cheap. I'll be all ears. I'd love to hear if there's a better way. But really, clean energy is, for me, just the best lever that we have to pull to protect everything that we love in the world.
Yeah.
Super
Do you
simple.
get pushback? And anybody throwing mud at you guys, being the politicians with, the petroleum special interests and so forth, saying, yeah, they can't possibly have any impact at that small. Someone must be throwing mud at you guys because it's just too powerful of a story.
Well, I think it's difficult for them. I think it's easier. It would have been easier maybe 5, 6 years ago when the economics were different to throw mud. But when there's so much blatant information now and data on how much cheaper clean energy is, it it quite literally doesn't make sense now to be doing more fossil fuels or in any way, shape, or form. And you've also obviously got nuclear, which is a much cleaner source of energy. Yes, there's waste from it, but on the whole, it's a hell of a lot a hell of a lot cleaner than fossil fuels. So we have all the technology there. It just needs to kind of happen, and it is happening. I told you the stat before about the trillions of dollars that's already going into it. So regardless of what any politician says, it's happening, and I think it's too big. It's like trying to swim through a tsunami. It's coming. It's
Mhm.
just a question of how quickly we get there. If I said to you, I said to anyone, what's the world going to look like in 50 years? I have no doubt in my mind that the world will be run off clean energy. A mix of clean energy, maybe nuclear fusion, depending on where the technology gets to. But, you know, the sooner we get there, the more of the world that we love will be protected.
Yeah.
And that's what really what point one is about.
Well, going back to ASU days when I was working with Bruno, there was also this brilliant physicist, Dr. George Basil, who I just love because he is also a marketing mind. Very brilliant guy, but very funny, and you could really get to the point. And we were in Amsterdam with our class one day, and we were on the bus going out to Philips Electronics to work with them. And he said to me, he goes, this whole petroleum thing is so weird. Can you just imagine the Martians flying down and seeing us humans running around with this most incredible product that, oil is to build so many incredible things. And what do? We burn it to get from point A to point B. He goes, that's the most ridiculous monkey minded thing you could possibly think of.
Well, but also an amazing stat that I love is the world's deserts receive more energy from the sun in 6 hours than we consume as a planet in a year. And you think about, America, Australia, or, there's just vast sun in so many parts and it's free. Like it's literally just there. All we're doing is just harnessing it. So like, we don't need to go through all that hassle of digging and drilling and all the rest of it. It's an abundant source. I remember listening to Elon Musk on a podcast not so long ago. I think it was the All In podcast from it's quite a well known one, and they were talking to him about nuclear and what his thoughts on. He was just like, guys, why are we spending billions of pounds or billions of dollars even trying to create loads of tiny little suns? We've got the biggest sun in the world and it's already there. We just need to harness it. And, solar panels are made from, I think, the second most abundant source on the planet, which is basically sand.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he was actually really interesting listening to Elon kind of talk about solar and how actually in his mind,
Yeah.
it's just like it's weird not to be thinking that over anything else.
No. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, and congratulations on coming up with, to me, what I believe is one of the best brand stories out there that I've heard in a long, long time. And I take away anything from this conversation, folks, simplicity. Make a complex message simple so that your audience, your colleagues, your customers, the communities you serve can easily bring it into and embed it in their life without having to do a lot of thinking.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, it's a real pleasure to be here. It's great chatting to you, and yeah, thank you also for the enthusiasm and kind words for what we're doing.
Absolutely. And everyone, point1.world. If you want to learn more, see their amazing campaign in action and/or start participating, point1.world. I'll put the link in the show notes too. So thank you, Ryan. I'll let you roll off and I'll talk to you soon.
All the best.
Man, I'm so glad you're with us today, and thanks so much for listening and sharing this episode with anyone you know who would benefit from Ryan's wisdom around making the complex simple so that you can move people to action. And if you need to help refine and define and simplify your brand story, jump on over to the Story Cycle Genie at storycyclegenie.ai and start that process today. Now, I hope you'll join me next Monday when Brian Burkhart of Square Planet is going to be with us, and he is going to talk about how you can elevate everything about you and your business through the stories you tell. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.